delighted to welcome Dae Bong Snim, Zen Master at Musangsa, Gyeomyang Mountain International Zen Center. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce Dae Bong Snim. Is his biography in the booklet? Well, if you have read it, but I think it'd still be nice to sort of go over it together because he has a very interesting story that he tells in his short biography. Well, Zen Master Dae Bong was born in 1950 in the United States and has a degree in psychology. He first became interested in Buddhism when he was 11 years old. This may not be so rare in Korea, but for an American to develop this interest in Buddhism, quite rare and unique, I must say. Anyway, he wanted to meet a living master, and he had that chance when he sat in a talk given by Zen Master Seung-san in 1977. And he tells the story of this professor in the audience asking this question: what is sanity? And what is insanity? And the answer that the Master Seung-san gave, I guess, convinced him to become fully committed to Buddhism. And this is what Master Seung-san said. To quote, if you're very interested, attached to something, you're very crazy. If you're a little attached to something, you're a little crazy. If you're not attached to anything, that is not crazy. And the last words of wisdom definitely apply to myself. Just kidding. Dae Bong Snim heard that and thought, this is my teacher. So he began studying with Zen Master Seung-san immediately. And after 7 years, he was ordained a Buddhist monk in 1984. He has lived and trained in meditation centers and temples in the USA, Europe, and Asia for over 30 years. He regularly comes to Korea in the winter to sit in 3-month Zen retreats called Gyolche. And in 1992, he received Inca authorization to teach, and in 1999, transmission from Zen Master Seung-san. He has traveled extensively throughout the world, teaching Zen. Currently, Zen Master Dae Bong is the head spiritual teacher at Musangsa, Gyeomyang Mountain International Zen Center in South Korea. So as I mentioned earlier, I think we're in for a real treat tonight, as he will speak about unique points of Korean Buddhism and their modern international development. So please join me in welcoming Dae Bong Snim with a warm round of applause.
Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to thank the Academy of Korean Studies for inviting me here tonight. I usually don't work from a written out script, so I tried to just make it kind of bullet style, and I'll see how it goes, trying to read these notes and add some comments along the way. And I hope that I'll leave you some time to ask questions really about anything that you want to ask at the end. So first, to just give you a summary, I want to take a brief look at the foundation of Korean Buddhism, how Buddhism came into the country, and what kind of effect it had on the people and the culture. And some of the aspects of Korean Buddhism that are unique among Buddhism in the world. And then I talk a little bit about how things are developing in this modern time. So first of all, I think it's been a great pleasure for me to run into Korean Buddhism, and especially to meet my teacher some years ago. And Korean, just like many things in Korean culture, until recently, they've been kind of hidden treasures that people are just finding out about. If you're not familiar with the history, I'll go through some of it. For 1,000 years, since the middle of the 4th century, the 300s, to the beginning of the 15th century, the beginning of the 1400s, Buddhism was the state religion of Korea. It's had a very deep effect on the culture and the thinking of Korean people, whether they're aware of it or not. As Westerners, we often say to ourselves, if you scratch a Korean underneath, there's a lot of Buddhist thinking. I think they say about us, if you scratch a Western Buddhist underneath, there's a lot of Judeo-Christian thinking. So these, the effects of culture on all of us are very deep, and often we're unaware of that. Buddhism entered Korea during the Three Kingdom period. You know, that is the first 600 years of the, we say modern era, I guess, from, what is it, 30, there it is. I've never worked this kind of device before, so excuse me if it's a little choppy. Buddhism entered during the Three Kingdom period, first coming into Goguryeo in the north in 372. Chinese monks came into Goguryeo, and they brought Buddhist images and sutras, which are the written out teachings of, reported to be the speeches of Buddha when he was teaching what he had discovered in enlightenment. This kind of touches me because the way I got interested in Buddhism personally is I grew up in Philadelphia, a big city at that time in the United States, and a very multicultural city. And went to school with Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, black people, white people. And I was very aware in the 1950s of the civil rights movement, which was one of the big social movements of getting equality in fact, in addition to law for black people. And it was very strong on my mind, why do white people treat black people badly? This was something that was in my consciousness. I also remember being 10 years old and going out on the street. We lived in a house, and looking down the street and seeing trees and nice houses, all fairly old, and everybody had a car, and thinking, wow, it's so beautiful and nice here. But I know inside the houses, there's all kinds of suffering going on. So it kind of hit me young that regardless of economic circumstances, they're suffering. And I really didn't understand why they're suffering and what you can do about it. And I was in Japan when I was 11 for an international camp, some program that I got to be part of. And they took us around the country to see different things. And at one point we were taken to Kamakura. And there's a large outdoor Buddha, maybe some of you have seen it, 20, 30 meters high. I had never seen Buddha, I'd never heard of Buddha, nothing. But as soon as I saw the statue, I remember getting this deep feeling inside that this person understands suffering and what to do about it. And of course, Korean Buddhists, if I mention that, they say, oh, before life you were a Buddhist. Why would you see this and not, and immediately have that reaction? And years later, after I was living in the Zen Center, I remembered that when I was in Japan as a kid, I bought presents for everybody in my family. You know, my mom and dad, my grandparents, my brothers. But I only bought one thing for myself, which was a little Buddha statue. So one day when I was visiting my mother's apartment, I went to look for this statue and found it years later at my brother's place. But there's some, you can think about that however you might, but it's just now thinking about it, actually religious art, maybe you experience it in whatever religion you follow, can have a very deep effect. And I never thought about that much, but it certainly did for me. So in 372, Chinese monks arrived in Goguryeo, bringing teachings of the Buddha and Buddhist objects. Then 12 years later, in Paekche, the southwestern kingdom, monk from India appeared. And at that time, he was given a very elaborate welcome by the royal court. So obviously, they must have already been aware of Buddhism and already were willing to receive this monk in some formal way. Buddhism was rather quickly accepted as the official religion of both Goguryeo and Paekche. And it was assigned the task of protecting the country and bringing good fortune to the rulers. So it began by being accepted by the ruling class as a way of organizing and focusing the country and supporting their rule. Although Buddhist ideas were slowly permeating the kingdom of Shilla, which was the kingdom in the southeast, it wasn't recognized as the official state religion there until 527. So already by that time then, the three main kingdoms of Korea were all following Buddhism as their state religion. For centuries, Korea had been absorbing ideas from China, Chinese culture, and transforming them into unique Korean forms and understanding. This would include all forms, many forms of art, of social organization, of the Chinese written characters. So it was not foreign to the Korean population to also pay attention to and even absorb the religions that was being followed in China. And Buddhism at that time was one of the major, probably the major religion, along with the teachings of Taoism and Confucianism. Taoism has had its effect on Korea very much, but not in a formal way. And when we asked our teacher once about how do Buddhists teach their children, he said, in Korea, Buddhist, Confucian, and Taoist ideas are all mixed together and just appear in the form of how people treat one another. So, for example, you serve the older people first, and then you serve the children, and then you serve yourself. So there was the way he described to us was no formal kind of education, but that Buddhist, Taoist, Confucian ideas had just permeated the culture and just become part of the way people live their lives. The introduction of Buddhism into the three kingdoms set the stage for some revolutionary changes in outlook and ways of thinking of both rulers and subjects. When I was, this first part I actually researched in a book, which I'll mention later. And somehow I feel aware of this in my own bones and intuition, but it's interesting to consider in a more clearly stated way that Buddhism coming into the three kingdoms really had a very big effect on the way people looked at their lives in this world, and not only among the rulers, but among all people. Some of the Buddhist doctrines, the three seals of existence, the four noble truths, the chain of causation and deliverance, brought concepts of universal law and egalitarianism to people who were just moving out of a clan-centered shamanistic society. So briefly I'll say what those three areas are. The three seals in Buddhism of existence is that all things are impermanent, that all appearing things have no self-nature, which means that nothing exists in an independent way, that everything arises according to condition. So at the time Buddha was alive, their whole society was going through a kind of change from all spiritual power being gathered together in the Brahmin class to the merchant class and the warrior class actually becoming much more independent and starting to think about these sort of theological issues. And the big issue at the time of Buddha was, is there a permanent self either inside the person or outside? And of course, the permanent self, the outside, we usually call God. And inside, well, whatever, soul or something. But most religions have some conception about those two things. And there were 6 schools of thought at the time in India when Buddha was alive about that. And when Buddha decided to leave home, being kind of shocked at existence. Do we just get a body, live this life, have ups and downs, and die? And in Hindu thought, repeat it again, over and over forever? And this really hit his mind, because even as a wealthy person, as a prince and king, he would also go through this. Even if he could protect himself from some difficulty, staying out of the rain, having enough food, he couldn't protect himself from old age, sickness, or death. One of our monks is in the hospital now with leukemia, and he's on the second to top floor. And I know the top floor is where really wealthy people can go. But I was thinking, no matter how comfortable it is, you know what it's like to be sick. And to really be sick, it doesn't matter anymore. At a certain point, whether I'm in the street or I'm in a comfortable place, when your body's really, really suffering, it doesn't make any difference. And this hit Buddha very strongly, especially with the prospect, as Hinduism understood, that it repeats endlessly. And he just wanted to find out how to get out of that. Is it possible to get out of that? And the issue that people were concerned with, as I said, was, is there a permanent self inside and outside? Buddha followed 2 of those schools' teachings, and in India, the intellectual and the physical were not separated. So religious practice in India, as I understand it, also involved the body and exploring the effects of thought on the body, the effects of the body on thought and experience. And so that's why yoga is not simply a physical practice. It's a kind of a mind-body practice, and why it also is effective and can be more effective than just simple exercise. So Buddha did these practices and actually completed the program of 2 of the great teachers of that time and still was unsatisfied. And then, of course, later he went off on his own and got enlightenment. And his realization was, of course, we can see everything's impermanent. But a much deeper realization was there is no self-nature. There is no independently existing anything outside of causes and conditions. And this is quite radical and has a very interesting effect if you come to realize this, that actually the nature of existence and the nature of who we are is beyond conception. We cannot realize through thought what we are. And of course, the Bible says this, the Quran says the peace that passeth understanding. So that God is beyond our understanding. So if we really digest that, then speech and words cannot touch the most important thing. But because we are the substance of the universe, we can realize that. And that substance has no life, no death. So realizing your mind's own nature is realizing there is no life and death. Only form is changing. If you don't attach to your body, if you don't attach to your consciousness, there's no life and death. Only the form is changing. What's listening to me now has no life and death. The form of your consciousness your ideas, your feelings, your cultural impressions, and your body changes, just like ice, water, steam. Nobody cries when ice disappears because we know, oh, it's just H2O getting a different form. I often say, yesterday you ate rice, so we called it rice. Today, it's my skin, it's my body, it's my emotion, it's my thought, it's me. Tomorrow, we go to the bathroom, boom, something comes out. So today, yesterday it's rice, today it's me, tomorrow something comes out. So, rice is you, and you are what's ever in the toilet. And they used to put that on the field, and it became rice. So all this form is just changing all the time, and there is no I. So this is actually the most profound thing that Buddha realized. And because of that, he's freed from the suffering of life and death. Your body may have suffering, but your mind's not suffering. So I'm going to digress from this. You can read this anytime you want. One time, an example of that is I give from my teacher, Korean Zen Master Seung San. One time he was very ill. He had diabetes, but he never stopped his work, and he wouldn't eat any meat or fish. So in America, he was getting his protein from eggs, which was not wise in a certain way. And eventually, the diabetes started to cause problems in different parts of his body. So one time in '95, I think he was here in Korea, and he became very, very sick. His lungs filled up with liquid, and he had to be rushed to the hospital. At that time, one of my friends was a monk and his attendant, and he told me this story. I wasn't with Seung San Sinim at that time. I was somewhere else. And they said that the hospital people came, they put in oxygen, IVs, put him on the gurney, rushed him to the hospital, and my friend, his attendant, was in the vehicle with him. When they got to the hospital, they were wheeling him in, and he was lying there having some difficulty breathing. And his attendant was looking down at him and feeling very sad that our teacher was sick, and worried about his health, and scared. He told me he thought, what will happen to me if my teacher dies? Then he said, Sansanim looked up at him from the gurney and said, don't worry, not die time, only rehearsal. So even in his own sickness and the difficulty breathing, he understood his student's mind and could take away his worry. We all can do that. If we're not holding anything in our mind, then the way this mind-body functions from my experience of practice is just like a mirror, it reflects. So you and everything, there's no thought of I, there's no opposites thinking. And you can't do this without, of course we all can do it naturally because it's us, but we make a habit of opposites thinking. And this creates endless problems. If you can learn to take away your opposites thinking, then you and everything have become one. Then your body and mind function like a mirror. They just reflect. So red comes red, white comes white. You see the sky, it's blue. You see a tree, it's green. You hear a dog barking, just woof woof is reflected in your mind. Sugar in the mouth, it's sweet. So you can experience this world very purely without any thoughts of good and bad, like and dislike, and no opposites thinking at all. Then you can also experience suffering and what causes suffering. If we see what causes suffering, we know how to undo it. You know, everybody's had relationships. Once you figure out that attaching to my partner will make lots of problems, we can train ourselves not to attach. Still be very involved, still have all kinds of feelings, but not be controlled by them. That's a very rare and unusual and wonderful. Then you will automatically, other people's minds will be reflected in your mind. You can understand other people. You probably do this with your husbands and wives and children some of the time. You know, we all do it some of the time. And then you can actually function in a way that helps them. So this is actually the radical point that Buddha realized. And all the teaching is just his description of how this world actually functions. And one of them is that there is no self-nature. And if you realize that, you're freed from suffering. And the third point of the three seals is that complete peace is stillness. And the Bible also says that. Be still, know that I am God. Of course, in ancient Hebrew, the word for know meant touch, to be touched by God. So when your mind's completely still, you are touched by God. I haven't read the Quran, but I bet you if you look through it, you'll find some similar statement. So this point of stillness is common, but you can't get there just thinking about it. So this idea came in. The Four Noble Truths is simply life is suffering. Life as it is imbalanced and unsatisfying. That's the nature of life. That's not good or bad. It's like saying, the ceiling's white. Is that good or bad? Somebody says good, somebody says bad. But it's white is the truth. So life itself, the nature of it is suffering. If you realize that, you won't be so crazy about being comfortable. Because even if you're comfortable, you're going to get some suffering. So that's the first. The second truth is suffering comes from craving and attaching. The third truth is it's possible to take away your craving and attaching and still be completely alive, not be some dead, passive thing. And fourth, how to do it. So these ideas came in. The chain of causation and deliverance just means how this universe appears, not the universe itself, but your universe, my universe, how my universe appears, and how everything in my life appears and how I can make it disappear. And Buddha describes that all from reflecting on his own experience. So these ideas came into Korea, and these ideas mean that it doesn't matter what position you are in society. This is how your life plays out. This is the truth of your life. So that had a very big effect, because probably back then, and I'm sure deep ways now, we feel that people in better situations are better off. But the truth of life is independent of our situation. The true experience of suffering or not suffering is independent of our social situation or even our body condition. So that meant that everybody's in the same boat on a very profound level. Also, the doctrine of individual salvation enhanced people's awareness of their personal identity. You know how artwork many centuries ago, nobody signed it. Nobody thought, I made this, and they put their name on it. That started, I don't know when. But so people didn't have perhaps so much sense of my own identity. Even now, I love it in Asia or Korea. Family name is first, then your individual name. Of course, in America, most Western countries, my individual name's first, then my family name. And that's coming from some deep sense of my involvement with others and my sense of self. It's not that one way's better or the other way's better. San Sanim, my teacher, used to say, Western people, too independent. Asian society, too much push the individual. So one time I asked him, what's good? He said, mixture. So you're living in Korea, and most of you aren't Korean, so you're already mixture. And the Koreans who are here, you're hanging out with foreigners, you're mixture. So this whole world now is mixture. That's actually going to help us a lot. Buddha gave people the idea that everyone is equal before the law of Buddha. And it doesn't mean the law of Buddha. It means the nature of existence. Everybody's in the same boat. And just being richer or in a better social position does not really help you when it comes to very important things. With the official recognition of Buddhism as the state religion in each of the three kingdoms, The law of Buddha also became the law of the state. Well, I'm sure that's happened in every country when a religion becomes the state religion. The ethics of the religion become the ethics of the state. And so that happened also. The ethical teachings of the Buddha became the laws and the teachings of the state. Where's my little thing here? For the common people, the Buddhist faith and cosmology replaced tribal myths. Well, I won't go into the details of that, but of course, you could give a whole hour lecture on that, I'm sure. But it just meant that Buddhist ideas were coming in very deeply, and a whole conception of the universe was coming into people's minds here. People of simple faith developed a great reverence for Amita Buddha and Maitreya, the future Buddha, and for the invocation of their blessings. So instead of doing, kuts and shamanic ceremonies, for example, to help improve your life based on the ideas of the native shamanism, there were ideas that a Buddha appeared and promised people, if you call on me, then even if you can't get enlightenment in this world, you'll be reborn in my world, which is called the Western Paradise, where it's much easier to get enlightenment from. That's what Amita Buddha is about. I think I talk about that later. And Miruk Bolsa is the future Buddha. Maitreya is, I think, the Sanskrit word, meaning that there is a future Buddha. This is part of Mahayana Buddhism, so there's someone to pray to help you. So common people could feel that there were things in this Buddhist teaching, that something to pray to, meaning they didn't really have faith in their own true nature, so they wanted to envision something outside of them that would bring them benefit. There were those things in Buddhism for the common people. This was a very kind of pragmatic and grace-soliciting form of Buddhism, which developed actually primarily in northern India and most fully in China, rather than, in contrast to the more ascetic and somewhat looked at a certain way nihilistic forms of Indian Buddhism, and was much easier to accept. Southern Asian Buddhism is called Theravadan or Hinayana Buddhism. Northern Asian Buddhism is called Mahayana. They're really slightly different threads. In Hinayana Buddhism, to boil it down to a very simple way of talking, as my teacher did, Theravadan Southern Buddhism is going from something to nothing. Human beings have desire, anger, and ignorance. These are poisons that give us suffering. If you learn to practice behavior, concentration, and wisdom correctly, then you can take away these three poisons and realize everything's originally empty and be freed from suffering. So the ideal in Southern Asian Buddhism is the monk or the nun, the person who leaves social life and focuses on these three practices to realize the inherent emptiness of everything. That's a Southern Buddhism. Northern Buddhism, Tibet, China, Korea, Japan, little mixture in Vietnam, is Mahayana, which developed later in the early 2nd century BC in northern India and then went north. And this conception is simply put as nothing going to something. That means this understanding that originally this universe is completely empty. And of course, modern science seems to be getting to that point also, that originally everything is empty and boom, something appears. In Buddhist terms, why it appears isn't important, because speculating about that will not take away suffering. And Buddha was only trying to teach the cause of suffering and how to take away. So originally nothing, boom, you have something. So how do you use this something correctly and get satisfaction? So if originally there's no I, then my life's done. I'm free. There's nothing for me to get. It doesn't matter. But already here, something here. So how do you use it in the correct way to get satisfaction means how do you use it to help others. So if your life is not from a thinking place, but from a realization of original emptiness for others, you will get true happiness everywhere. So it's a much more, it's quite pragmatic, and it's got a very positive kind of point of view. And the ideal in this northern Buddhism is the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is, it literally means enlightenment being, enlightened being. The Bodhisattva is one who is enlightened, can give up everything and never return, but who makes a vow to stay in the world and use their life to help others until everybody has been freed. I think you're all bodhisattvas because you're in service to your country and to the international community. So your life is for others. So this is the ideal of Mahayana Buddhism, which was much more acceptable to Korean people and to Northern Asian people as a very, is easier to accept. And the practices that developed out of it, originally what came in were these protecting the nation practices and asking for help from outside yourself. The ruling elite, for the ruling elite, Buddhism provided a support for the nation and for the ruler himself, who was often seen as an incarnation of the Buddha. So when the religion came in, you can probably do a whole history of Christianity and Islam and other religions the same way. How come it was they were acceptable to people from all parts of society? So this is how Buddhism was acceptable to people from all parts of society in Korea. And a genuine effort was made to run the kingdoms in accordance with Buddhist ethics. And of course, Buddha talked many things about how to behave correctly and beneficially to others. Of course, most people probably think of it as a religion of monks and nuns, but there's a whole sutras where Buddha talks about what are the 5 actions that a friend should do for other friends? What are the 5 actions that a husband should do for a wife? What are the 5 actions a wife should do for the husband? And they're very lovely. For example, the husband, of course, at that time, the husband was the outside person and the wife was the inside person. But the husband, it's a little like Korea, gives authority to the inside, to the house, to the wife. You know, as I understand it, your paycheck, the male's paycheck in Korea is supposed to go to the wife. Then she can give a little play money back to the husband, which is very practical because most women aren't going to blow money on sex and gambling and alcohol. But men, you know, men will do that more often than women. So all the money goes to the woman and she controls that. So that came originally from Buddhist ideas, that the power of the house should be given to the wife and the husband should always respect her authority, not correct her in front of servants, things like that. The 5th one is, very interesting to me as a monk, the husband should give jewelry and gifts to the wife. So, you know, if you like that, then, you know, tell your husband you've become Buddhist and he better follow the rules. So anyway, they really sincerely, these 3 kingdoms, try to use Buddhist ethics to run their countries. Also, Buddhism brought with it aspects of the highly developed cultures of China, Central Asia, and India, brought that into Korea. And that was, of course, in all areas of arts and science and religion and statecraft and so forth. In 668, after many years of fighting between the kingdoms, Shilla was able to unite the country into one nation, into what's called United Shilla. And many of you probably all know the history of the 3 kingdoms and the unification and so forth. And as I think most of us know, the Shilla period was really a great flowering of culture in Korea. And I've seen some movies. I really want to get this on the Discovery Channel. It's about some of the, of course, the Sokoram Grotto and a reliquary, a amazing piece of artistic work where some relics of the Buddha are supposed to be kept. And the technology that, the technological ability to make some of these things, nobody can replicate without machinery now. That means people's eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind were much more precise and powerful than ours are now. Nowadays, our intellect is very strong, but our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body are getting weak. And this will have big consequences for us in the future. Of course, as we start to replace things with machine parts. A common ethnicity, language, and religious and cultural ideas allowed the Korean people to unite as a nation. So, you know, so many countries now, I mean, America has this problem, everybody has this problem of, you know, getting all these different groups to unite and feel as a nation. The three kingdoms under Silla were able to do that because of these facts, these things. And if you know the history, Tang Dynasty helped Silla defeat Paekche and Goguryeo. Then Tang Dynasty's plan was they'll turn against Silla and take over Korea. But Silla was able to unite with the rest of the country and together hold off China. So this is very interesting, this next point. For modern times, after a series of brilliant military victories against Tang, this is in the 600s, late 600s, Korea was recognized by China as a nation whose borders were to be inviolate. This relationship has lasted from the 7th century till today, and you can still see it functioning today. Essentially what happened was Tang Dynasty could not conquer Korea. So to keep their face, they said, okay, you're our little brother, and your king must send some tribute every year, and then we won't touch you. And it's still like that. Of course, Korea looked at it differently. Okay, you think you're the big brother, but you're not getting into my space. And it's still like that. Actually, you, in a certain way, you have to realize that both North and South Korea are very good, very skillful at managing their relationships with China. You know, even North Korea has managed to get benefit from China and not let China come in and control things. This is a skill that Koreans have been developing. It's like the little brother who knows how to get the benefit of the big brother, but not get pushed around. This is a very admirable thing. And I think it's why Korea will stay strong. Of course, we know that already China is changing the books to try and claim a lot of North Korean territory for itself. And I know scholars in Korea are already at work showing how parts of China were in fact colonized or lived in by Korean people long, long time ago. So anyway, this is very interesting, you know. This is still going on. Of course, until recently, the politics of Korea didn't change at all in 1,500 years. You still have the Southwest, the Southeast, and the North. When Kim Dae-jung was elected, I said to my friend from Jeollado, I said, oh, Paekche won. You know, so it's the same as before, but now so many people live in Seoul and Gyeonggi-do that these regional alliances are starting to break down. So, you know, this stuff to me, it's interesting because it's happening now. You know, this is how deep all cultural experience is in our consciousness. And everybody, we can look at our own countries and our own experience, and it's in there too. Whatever our cultural history is very deeply in there, and we're often not aware of it. And the whole purpose of meditation practice is to become aware of that stuff that's in our consciousness and that is actually driving our behavior, relations, and conceptions about the world. All this stuff I took out of a book that was written by a friend of mine, a monk from India, called Thousand Peaks. And if you want to read a non-academic but very readable and very interesting history of Buddhism in Korea, I would recommend this book far above any others. He touches on the periods of Buddhism coming in, the development, and many of the great Buddhist monks, and they're very fascinating stories. I'm going to fly through this part. It's not quite as interesting. But during the United Shilla with the support of the royal house, many Koreans ordained as monks and nuns. Many of them, traveled to China, bringing back the teachings of the various schools of Buddhism that had developed in China, established around different sutras. Like any religion, Buddhism broke into sects, and they were based on the different sutras of the Buddha's teaching. And sometimes these sects would argue with each other. And it really followed according to the country. For example, India, excuse me for generalizing, but India is a country that's very spiritual, very philosophical. And so its Buddhism is also like that. And the Buddhist sutras are enormous, and they're very interesting and profound. When Buddhism went up into Tibet, Tibet had the Bon religion. The Bon religion had all these demons in it. So Tibetan Buddhism swallowed that. And it's very colorful, and there's all these demons, but most of these demons are helping Buddha in some way. So for example, if you have a lot of anger, a meditation teacher will give you an image of some aspect of a Buddha that looks really angry, and you meditate on that until you can hold it in your consciousness, the picture, all the details, and it takes probably a couple years to do that. And then you identify with it, and then you see this picture as nothing but a mental projection, and you experience emptiness. That's sort of the basic technique. So, so Tibetan Buddhism has a lot of demons. I went to a Tibetan Buddhist exhibit in New York about 20 years ago with our teacher, and we went through it, and Sansanim said, Tibetan Buddha, very big eyes, and so that's the way it was absorbed into that culture. Chinese culture was a Taoism, connect to nature, and the principle of the universe is before speech. And if you become called the Tao, the way, if you become one with that, then you're in harmony with all things. So it's very simple. So when Buddhism went into China, you get statements like, what is Buddha? Sky is blue. What is Buddha? Why did the great patriarchs come to teach China? The cypress tree in the garden. Just pointing to nature and perceiving in nature itself these profound questions of existence and so forth. That's Chinese Buddhism. Japanese culture is very strongly influenced by the samurai. So if you visit, so Japanese culture, when Buddhism went in there were all these different warlords. So each warlord would take a different aspect of Buddhism and use it against his neighbors. So it's very sectarian. And if you go to in a Korean Zen center, if you do meditation, you can stand up if you're uncomfortable. In a Japanese Zen center, if you move at all, I've done retreats with Japanese Zen masters. They shout, "Don't move!" When your nose is running, you go, "Don't make noise!" It's a very effective way to practice. There's no heat in the winter. You're not allowed to wear a hat, scarf, gloves, or socks. I've done these retreats. You must focus your energy. If you don't focus your energy, you cannot do it. But it's also very harsh. Korean Buddhism has its own characteristic. In my experience of Korea culture, I feel I feel what I've discovered is the core principle is injung, human love, human nature. What is human beings' correct relationship to heaven, to earth, and to all beings? So my feeling in the clothes, in the tea, in all the traditional arts from years ago, the core aspect is this injunct, human relationship. What is correct human relationship? What is correct to human being? So in Buddhism, it's the same way. And we'll see how that plays out. So in Korea, these different schools of Buddhism from China came in, and during the Shilla dynasty in Koryo, when Buddhism was the state religion for both, 5 schools appeared of doctrine. and they were different from each other, and they argued with each other. At the same time, many monks who went to China were attracted to the dhyana school, which is the meditation school, which developed in China from the teachings of the great Indian patriarch Bodhidharma. All Zen students know Bodhidharma. He's considered the monk who brought Zen teachings to China, and there's great stories about him, which I won't tell tonight. But the last line there is just for our education. The Indian word for contemplation or meditation is dhyana. The Chinese pronunciation of that is chan. The Korean pronunciation of that is sun. And the Japanese pronunciation of that is zen. So most people are familiar with the Japanese pronunciation zen. And in this talk, I'll probably flip back and forth between sun and zen. But they're all talking about the same thing. So Bodhidharma is reputed to have arrived in China in 520 AD. He saw that Chinese Buddhism at the time was primarily based on gaining merit, gaining blessings. By doing various offerings, by praying, you got some benefit for yourself in this life or for the next life. Or it was based on intellectual discussion and understanding of Buddhist speech, okay? But Bodhidharma taught that the real intent of Buddha was to realize the true nature of our mind, realize the nature of our mind. And when one does that, naturally, just by realizing its nature, correct love, compassion, equanimity, and wisdom appears. And of course, all of us have those things. It's just that they appear intermittently, which in Zen we say is like cooking rice and sand together. And this is why we can't solve most of the problems in the world, because we're all functioning with rice and sand cooked together. But if you purify your mind, then maybe we can just cook rice in our own mind, and then the solutions actually are not based on idea. They will arise out of the situation themselves and work. And you don't need to convince anybody of it. I find that as the leader of a temple. The less I have any idea about anything, the more quickly I can do or say something that brings harmony and that works. So, none of this stuff would make any difference to me if it didn't work in my life. And my teacher told me when I first came to him, don't read. And I didn't really read any of the Buddhist teachings or even my teacher's own books for about 20 years. I just practiced, not just the formal meditation, but how do you keep your mind moment to moment in your daily life. So anyway, this is what Bodhidharma felt Buddha was really teaching. Just the realization of the nature of our own mind. And since it's your mind, all you have to do is look at it and you'll realize its nature. Not its content. It's got all kinds of garbage coming and going, but its nature itself. When one accomplishes this, realizing the true nature of our mind, then you're freed from the suffering of life and death, and you're able to freely help others. When you're not attached, you can help everybody very easily, and I'm sure you all experience that. And if you reflect on your life, you'll remember times today even that you did that. From Bodhidharma's teaching and practice, a unique school of Buddhism developed in China, known to most people nowadays as Chan, Sun, or Zen. Anyway, this is just, my teacher had a very good, simple way of phrasing things. So when people would ask him about where Zen came from, he would just say, Indian Buddhism went to China and met Chinese Taoism. They got married and had a baby. Baby is Zen. So basically, this form of Zen teaching can go back to Buddha. He picked up a flower, didn't say anything, nobody understood, only Mahakashyapa smiled. Then Buddha said, you have my true Dharma. It's called a transmission from mind to mind, not dependent on speech. Of course, when you're close to somebody, you have it all the time. You look at your wife, she understands what you mean. You start talking, and it takes a long time to communicate. Sun practice and teaching becomes very important later in Korean Buddhism. Bodhidharma only had 4 students when he lived in China, but within 150 years, his style of practice and teaching became one of the 2 main streams of Buddhism in China. He's famous for going to a mountain and sitting in a cave for 9 years and just looking at the wall. And eventually one Chinese monk came to him. They had an interchange. That monk got enlightened and passed it on. Within a few generations, it exploded all over China, and many great masters appeared. Many people started to follow not just the form, but the spirit of what Bodhidharma was teaching. So if Zen, if Sun is the self-realization of the essence or nature of our mind and the subsequent freedom from the suffering of life and death, then what is a pure, the two main streams of Chinese Buddhism became Zen and Pure Land. So what is Pure Land? Then Pure Land Buddhism is the belief that it is hard to get enlightenment through one's own efforts in this life. But if you purify your mind and your behavior, then after you die, you will go to a paradise. You know, in Buddhism, they call it the Western paradise, where it is not so difficult to get enlightenment. Most religions, one of the purposes is you want to die and go to heaven. But in Buddhism, heaven is just one of the 6 realms of existence, and everything works by natural cause and effect and mathematics. If you do 5 good things, you get to stay in heaven 5 credits. When the credits are used up, you're back into the 6 realms of existence, moving around again. So heaven is not the goal. Getting enlightenment is the goal. If you get enlightenment, if you never want to come back and just dissolve into nirvana, you can. If you decide to come back, you can decide where. So people like the Dalai Lama can do that. Most of us cannot do that. From a Buddhist point of view, when we die, we come back, but we're pulled by our karma. If you act badly, you're pulled into a bad situation. If you act good, you're pulled into a good situation. If you keep a lot of consciousness about, oh, I like man, 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 you become a man. If you hold a lot of consciousness of woman, you become a woman. If you make a lot of suffering for somebody, sometimes you become the opposite. Like men, you know, be careful. If you make women suffer, you know, you're going to come back as a woman and some man's going to make you suffer. That's sort of the teaching. So cause and effect is very clear. There's no good, no bad. Just each action has a consequence. That's all. So I often think about there's 2 kinds of suffering in this world. One kind of suffering leads to more suffering. One kind of suffering leads out of suffering. Hey, we're already at 7 o'clock. Look at that. So we did that. What developed, I don't even know if I'm going to look at these notes too much for a while, because I only have a few minutes. What developed in Korea were 5 schools of doctrine, 9 different schools of Zen practice, and this Pure Land Buddhism. And then a very interesting thing happened. Wan Hyo appeared. Maybe you've heard of Wan Hyo Daegyo. Wan Hyo is the most famous Korean monk. He appeared in the 600s. And he had a tremendous effect on Korean Buddhism and Korean culture. And he did it in 2 ways. First, he spent his life writing treatises that united all the different teachings of Buddha. So basically, he said that all the teachings of Buddha are the same. They're just expressed differently in order to teach different people. Just like you would talk one way to a 4-year-old and another way to a 15-year-old. You're trying to teach them both something like correct action, but you'll talk to them differently. In the same way, all of Buddha's teaching, what Wan Hyo realized and demonstrated, is just different ways of expressing the same thing. So there's no reason for all these schools to fight. That's called the harmonization of all doctrines. The next thing he did is not even on here. There, second at the top. Unbridled freedom in teaching and helping others. He was from a noble class, and originally he taught the noble people. And then through some interesting conversion, he let go of his noble situation and he began to teach common people. And he even stopped, he didn't officially stop being a monk, but he stopped keeping the precepts and just called himself Little Layman. So he freely taught people from any culture, and it made the a characteristic of Korean Buddhism where helping others is more important than following the rule. So for example, precepts. In China, if you're a Buddhist monk and you break the precepts, they will take your clothes, burn it, and throw you out of the temple. In Korea, if you break the precepts, if you bothered people, you have to bow and repent and promise not to do it. But if nobody was bothered by it, nobody is touched. There's a famous story of one of my Dharma uncles, my grand teacher's Dharma brother, who spent a few months living with a woman who had leprosy and sleeping with her. He broke the precepts of sex. But when he was asked about it, he said, I try to help her experience love. So you know, if you want to have sex, there's lots of nice people around. You don't need to find a person who has leprosy. So in Korean Buddhism, there's this kind of wide-minded sense of behavior, which we all know can lead to lots of problems. Oh, I'm just helping everybody. Go stop, you know. So that's a problem. But it means, as my teacher said, any action's not good or bad. Why do you do it? If it helps all beings, keeping the precepts to help all beings, wonderful. Breaking the precept to help all beings, wonderful. But you can't just say, oh, I'm doing that for you. If it really is, then you won't be upset if people blame you later. It's a very easy way to see if somebody really is doing bodhisattva action. You can condemn them and they won't be bothered by it. Then they were perhaps really helping someone else. So these are two aspects of Korean Buddhism that are unique. Okay, here's the unique points. First, it's syncretic. All the schools of doctrine and meditation and Pure Land are joined together and viewed as simply different expressions to help people of different, to help different people. And down on the fourth one, there are now 8 temples in Korea that are called Chunlim. And at these temples, training in all these different aspects, sutra study, chanting, prayer, meditation, work practice is all done at the same temple in different halls, but the community life is all done together. No other country has this kind of thing. So the Chogi order, which represents this, sees all of Buddha's teaching as simply different ways of communicating the same point. So there's no sectarianism. That's a huge difference in Korean Buddhism from any other kind of Buddhism in the world. Second one is there's an unbroken line of ordination. For ordination to be correct, it has to be unbroken, so that ordained people give it to ordained people, and nuns give it to nuns. And this ordination for women was broken at some point in Tibet and in southern Asia. So only China, for quite a while during communism, only in Taiwan, and Korea have unbroken full ordination for nuns. So this means that the nun practice in Korea, which is independent from the monks' practice, they have their own headquarters, even though they're under the umbrella, say, of the Chogi order, and they run their own temples, is unbroken. This ordination transmission is unbroken, and women who want to ordain, take the full ordination from Tibet, from Southeast Asia, come to Korea or Taiwan to do it. So among Buddhists, of course, this is something that's greatly respected, that the rules of ordination never broke in Korea, and so this passing of full ordination, particularly to women, is considered legitimate and treasured. Third point is there's a very strong and unbroken tradition of mountain meditation in Korea. And each year there are at least 100 Zen halls that have the 3-month retreat, twice a year, very intensive retreat. Okay, I'm supposed to stop, and I'm sorry that we didn't get all the way through this, but you can read what's in here, and according to my watch, I have 7 minutes, and you don't need to give any talk after me. You can just say thank you. How's that? So I'd like to ask if anybody has any question, any kind of question, theoretical, personal, I accept comments, insults, anything, no problem. Desire for an emotional relationship with a woman. Yeah. One time my teacher said to me, your problem's not so much physical, it's emotional. He was right. Yeah, I'd say that's that was the hardest thing. It came up a few times, so I had lots of chance to practice with it. Yeah. Any other question? Now I have really good relationships, much better than when I was a layman, and I'm much happier. But you know, in Buddhism, they say there's sanim happiness and layperson's happiness. Somebody's going to be most happy as a layperson. Somebody's going to be most happy ordained. So I realized quite early on that I had to be ordained, really whether I wanted to or not. And that helped me get through.
And no mixture.
No what?
No mixture?
Mixture.
Yeah.
Well, in here, lots of mixture. In fact, the mixture all turns into gold, you know. Your problem turns into your wisdom. You just have to digest it. Most important thing in our life is digesting our experience. Doesn't matter what experience you had, digesting your ideas. For example, if you eat good food but cannot digest it, it will become rotten in your stomach and make you sick and unpleasant to others. But if you eat even poison but you can digest it, it will become fresh energy and you can use it for anything. So every emotion, every thought, every physical experience is the same. If you learn how to digest them, it becomes love, compassion, wisdom. Opinions are just my opposites thinking. Truth is, it's dark outside. I like it, I don't like it, anything, that's all opinion. But just seeing it's dark outside, that's a truth. So if you learn to digest your opinions, you will attain truth. My teacher's great at that. We asked him once, what's the difference, I'm American, between East Coast people and West Coast people? He said, East Coast people have very few opinions but hold them very strongly. West Coast people, there's some guy here from California, have many opinions but don't hold them strongly. Then we once asked him, what's the difference between Korean people and American people? He said, Korean people have 2 horns, American people have no ears. Then I thought, oh my God, that means we're not listening to him. And everybody knows Korean, you know, it's like poke, poke, poke. You know, we have women come to, young unmarried women in their 20s and 30s, every Chuseok come to our retreat for a 3-day, come to our temple for a 3-day retreat because they don't want to go home and be asked, why aren't you married? You know, poke, poke, poke. So that's the Korean society. And Americans, we all know, Americans don't listen, you know. Unfortunately, we got big guns and we don't listen, it's a problem. You know, if we don't have any guns and we don't listen, who cares? You know, it's our problem. Then we asked them, one monk who was Jewish asked him, what's the difference between American wasps and American Jews? And he said, American wasps have 1 horn, American Jews have 1 ear. It's very descriptive, not good, not bad, you know. Then at least you know what you're dealing with, you know. So if you know how to digest your opinions, you can perceive truth very quickly. It's not an intellectual process. It's just like a mirror. Boom, you get it. And you don't need to be proud of it. If you're proud of it, already there's I, okay? If you digest your emotions, any emotions, correct love appears. Probably, you know, you're not young, you already know. Love is not an emotion. Love is a relationship, a kind of relationship, you know, a devotion to the other. It's like a mother's mind, unconditionally for the other. But compassion's necessary. Compassion has a little stick. So if you digest any emotion, it becomes love. If you digest any understanding, it becomes wisdom. Wisdom we don't carry around in here. It's the ability to function clearly and correctly in the moment. And he's standing over there, and my correct function now is say, thank you very much.